So my name's Megan Rossi and I'm a research fellow here at King's, looking at a range of different diet-based therapies that target our gut health. We have trillions of microorganisms, including mostly bacteria, but also things like yeast, parasites, viruses, which actually synergistically work together to have a benefit. So we shouldn't be fearing those sorts of things.
You're known as the gut health doctor. Tell us a bit about how you got into that area, because that's not like the most glamorous of specialisms on the face of it.
We're making it, aren't we? So I actually have always just been very much into food. So I came from a big Italian family and I lived on a farm in Australia. So food was so important to me. My grandma, who had a huge part of my upbringing, actually passed away of bowel cancer. And I still vividly remember hating the gut so much for doing that to her, as I, watched her suffer through the surgery, through chemo. And it was a few years after that where a lot of those negative emotions around the gut actually resurfaced. And it was when I was working as a clinical dietitian, patients were coming to me saying, I've got a lot of gut issues. And I thought, what is going on? Why are these people complaining of gut issues when their disease is actually in their kidneys? So I did what any crazy 21-year-old would do, and I decided to do a PhD to really understand the link between our gut health and other organs. And what we found is that those who got dietary intervention actually had a significant reduction in some of the toxins in their blood, which are linked with poor progression of their kidney disease. So that was the first taste that there really was this, mechanistic link between our gut and our kidney. Also, I was very fortunate during my PhD to also be the nutritionist for the Australian Olympic synchronized swimming team, and found out that the girls who had the most performance anxiety also had the most number of gut issues. So it wasn't just this unique gut-kidney axis that I was studying in my PhD, but also this gut-brain axis.
So you mentioned the prebiotics and probiotics. Tell us a bit about what works and what doesn't.
Prebiotics is a certain types of fiber or food that feeds our gut bacteria. Having just a really diverse range of plant-based foods is going to get those prebiotics in. Probiotics, that is essentially some beneficial bacteria which is shown to have benefit through clinical trials. Where the evidence currently stands is that if you're generally healthy, you certainly don't need to take a probiotic, but there are some areas where there is some really good evidence to suggest that if you do have this condition, then actually taking a probiotic will benefit you. So one example is if you have to take antibiotics for whatever reason, there's good evidence to suggest that if you take a probiotic alongside the antibiotics, then you significantly reduce your risk of antibiotic-associated diarrhea.
Can you tell us a bit about some of the ways in which that bacteria is being beneficial to your health?
One of my favorite studies was called the SMILES trial. And what they did is they took a group of people who had moderate to severe depression, and they put them either on a gut boosting diet, which was very, very high in dietary fiber. And remember, dietary fiber is a nutrient that feeds the bacteria. So it's super, super high in the fiber. It contained actually 50 grams a day. In the UK, we have about 20 grams a day of that fiber. And the other intervention group was a placebo intervention. It was a counselling type of befriending therapy. And what they found is that in the diet group, 32% of them had a significant improvement in their mental health that would have classified them as no longer clinically depressed. In the placebo group, that was only 8%. So it was a really, really interesting and very landmark study that showed, probably for the first time, that diet has a huge impact on our mental health. So if we're feeding our gut microbes the fiber, as well as many other plant-based foods within that, then that essentially can impact our mental health.
How is it that the bacteria in our guts are having such a massive effect on our brain? How are they getting there?
We've known about this relationship between the gut and the brain for ages. If you think about it, if you're really nervous, you get the butterflies in your stomach. So there's always been a connection there. But now we see that there's a new player to that connection, and that is the bacteria. And what we've seen, there's kind of three mechanisms that we hypothesize or expect the bacteria to have an impact on our mental health. And also our mental health to have an impact on our gut bacteria. So it is a two-way communication. So the first one is kind of, I like to think of it like a mobile phone. It's where the microbes send messages up our vagus nerve, and that activates parts in our brain to do certain things. The second element is via our immune system, and that's kind of like an alarm system. So if the microbes in our gut sense that there's something going on, there's an invader, then it can trigger the immune system, and 70% of our immune system actually lays within our gut. and our immune system will produce a range of different chemicals like inflammatory markers, which then can also have that effect on our brain. And then the third element is kind of like snail mail, where the bacteria can actually produce chemicals that get into our blood and then go up past the blood-brain barrier and have that effect.
What's actually going on in the brain when you've got different kinds of bacteria doing their thing and sending all these messages, and how is it affecting people's mental health?
There's been some studies which have started to suggest there could be some mechanisms where the bacteria can actually affect things like GABA, so one of the hormones which can have this very calming effect on different parts of our brain. But the exact mechanisms is still something we don't quite understand. It's more of the intervention studies have shown that if we give just a single bacteria, so they've done a probiotic study and they've done brain MRI scans and have shown that after a 6-week intervention of taking a specific probiotic compared to those who have a placebo intervention, they actually have different parts of their brain activated which are associated with emotion and resilience. We're not exactly sure how it's activating different parts like the amygdala and parts of the brain associated with those emotions. But there's clearly something there.
You mentioned fibre was very important in the depression study. Where can we get more fibre from, and should we be eating more than the 20 grams that we eat on average?
It's not just fibre, there's other plant chemicals like these things called polyphenols, which is why people say things like dark chocolate, red wine are all meant to be slightly beneficial to some degree in moderation. And that's because of these plant chemicals, polyphenols. So it's not just about taking a fibre supplement, it's about getting in a diverse range of plant-based foods. So things like whole grains, nuts, seeds, legumes, vegetables, fruits, all of those things should be part of our daily diet in quite large amounts.
What are the best kind of swaps that we can do?
One of the things we know from the scientific studies is that those people who have at least 30 different plant-based foods in their diet a week actually have a more diverse range of bacteria in their gut, which is associated with, better weight management, better mental health, better heart health, etc. So it's about making really small changes to your diet. And one strategy I find works for so many people is really just to get a packet of mixed seeds. So they usually have 4 different seeds in it, and pop it on to whatever breakfast you're having. Just add a teaspoon on if you're having some toast. Sprinkle it on your toast. The cereal, sprinkle on your cereal, and then you got 4 points right there. Instead of at the grocery store buying just the one type of lettuce, why don't you get the multi-pack? Because each different type of lettuce actually has different plant chemicals which feed the different bacteria. So like us, we have different taste preferences, so do the bacteria. And if we have that diverse range of plant chemicals, we will feed a diverse range of different bacteria. But each bacteria has different skills. So if you're only feeding that, a minority type of bacteria that grows and overrides the rest, then you'll only have a small number of skills that the bacteria have, like producing different vitamins, hormones, etc. So if you feed the bacteria that really diverse range, essentially you've got more skills in your toolkit.
You said that intimate kisses can transfer bacteria between partners. So are we influencing the gut bacteria of the people that we're in relationships with?
So there was a really interesting study which showed that we have millions of bacteria in our saliva. In fact, we have this oral microbiota, we have our gut microbiota, we actually have a skin microbiota. So we actually, on us, we've got millions of bacteria. So we are starting to try to intervene and see whether we are transferring them and how that's impacting on our partner's health. At this stage, we just look at observation studies and see that things like obesity if you've got an obese partner, there's a increased risk of you also being obese. Now, it's probably because of your eating environment rather than the bacteria, but there is a hypothesis that maybe you're transferring the bacteria, which we have also been shown to be linked with obesity.
There was a study, and I think they might have done it in humans as well, where you transfer the gut bacteria from say an obese mouse to a non-obese mouse, and then the non-obese mouse becomes obese.
That study was so fascinating. In fact, fecal microbiome transplants are saving thousands of lives every year. So it is a therapy, and they are starting to look at whether they can translate that into humans. And they have done some studies looking at transplanting the fecal sample from a lean person into an obese person to see whether it has any weight benefits. And the studies to date have suggested it didn't necessarily help them lose weight over, I think it was about a 12-week period, but it did have an effect on their insulin levels, which is linked with obesity, has a role in that. So some of the mechanisms that are proposed, we think that different bacteria can produce different types of chemicals which can affect our metabolism.
Do you think it's going to be something that we're going to look back and think, how did we not know how important that was at the time?
Yeah, absolutely. The gut health, although if we look in the media, it does have a bit of a fad or a trend feel, but it certainly isn't. If you look at the scientific literature, every single day there is a new paper coming out highlighting how important our gut health is to the health of every other organ. So I certainly think it will be something in a couple of years, people, not even 20 years, I think 5 years, everyone will be looking after their gut. In fact, one of the things in the book that I really hope I get across is that whenever we eat, we should be thinking, okay, what foods do my taste buds want, but also what foods do my bacteria want? Because the things that we eat really does impact our gut bacteria, and they do so much to look after us. So why don't we look after them?
Something you mentioned in terms of recipes and things in the book were fermented foods. So I don't know anything really about fermented foods. That was kind of new to me.
If you think of all the most flavoursome foods out there, they're actually all have a fermented step in them. Chocolate, soy sauce, olives, coffee, all of those sorts of things actually require fermentation from the bacteria. And what the bacteria and yeast and different microbes do is they kind of eat or pre-digest some of the nutrients, and they create a range of different flavors and some health chemicals. Now, when we look at the scientific evidence, the area is still very much in its early days. But if we look at the anecdotal evidence from our ancestors who've been having these fermented foods for thousands of years, and associating them with benefit, I think we can become a little bit more enticed to actually do the scientific elements of the studies and the clinical trials to have a look at how that translates. I actually make kefir every single day. It's super easy. You don't need to be an expert, and you don't need a lot of time. So essentially, it's just getting cow's milk, and you add in these grains, which is like a community of millions of bacteria and yeast. Put them in some cow's milk, and then you leave it on the bench, so outside, to ferment for about 8 hours or so. And what the microbes do is actually start to ferment the milk sugar called lactose and produce a range of different organic acids. After the 8 hours ferment, so I do it overnight, you just get the fermented milk, the kefir, with the grains in it, you pour it, you filter it out, and then you collect the grains, and then you put them in new milk, and then at the bottom, you've got your kefir. So it's kind of like similar to yogurt, a sour yogurt, but it's got a lot more different, diverse range of microbes in it. So we think it should be more beneficial, but we need to do more scientific studies.
How do I know whether I have a healthy gut or not? Is there a kind of tick list? Is it just about feeling?
So that's the $1 trillion question. Is there just one marker that will determine if you've got a healthy gut? I get people to complete a range of 10 different assessments, which we piece together to get an idea of potentially how healthy people's guts are. One of the assessments is around listening to your gut. So are you getting bothersome gut symptoms every week, or is your gut pretty happy in that department? Checking with your poop, so what sort of consistency of your poop are having. Now, if they're all quite normal, that doesn't still necessarily mean that you've got a healthy gut. Looking at other things like how diverse is your diet, what's your mental health like, are you constantly getting sick? One of the really interesting things is that 70% of our immune system actually lays within our gut and has such an important role in our gut health. So if you're getting sick all the time, that may suggest maybe your gut health isn't quite right.
Why do we get so embarrassed about it? Are there different cultures that you found do talk about it a bit more? Like, should we all be talking about it a bit more?
Yeah, look, I don't think you need to bring it up over dinner, but it certainly is a cultural thing. So other cultures are, happy to talk about their bowels. And I think it is so important that we, in the UK, talk more about our bowels, because bowel cancer is actually one of the 3rd biggest cancer killers in the world. And the UK, it's really prominent. And a lot of that is because people, when they start to see changes in their stools or their feces, they're a bit embarrassed to go to their GP, and they wait until it gets really, really bad. If people catch their bowel cancer quite early, then they've got really good success rates. So, you know, like my grandma, I always wonder whether if she'd spoken up early and I hadn't been as embarrassed, would she still be here today? And all the stats suggest she would be.
Well, thank you so much. It's a brilliant book, and it certainly made me rethink my bowels and my shopping list. So yeah, it's brilliant. Thank you for talking with us.
Thanks for having me.